Jason Carter's injury on a dangerous job wasn't just an accident. It was the moment that revealed years of racist exploitation at his factory. Fired and left to fend for himself, he fought back, uncovering chilling truths and taking a stand that shocked everyone. What happened next would stun even those who've seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Jason Carter, a 35-year-old black machinist, stepped into the vast, noisy factory that had been both his workplace and silent battlefield for the past 5 years. The air smelled of oil and hot steel, the rhythmic pounding of machinery reverberating like a relentless heartbeat. Jason, known for his precision and speed, had built a reputation as one of the most dependable workers on the floor. His record was flawless, his demeanor calm, and his work ethic unparalleled. Yet none of that spared him from the unspoken bias that hung heavy over the factory. Every dangerous job seemed to find its way to Jason, assignments no one else dared touch. Rick Dalton, the burly foreman with a perpetually smug expression, always had a ready excuse. "You're quick on your feet, Jason," Rick would say, his grin as sharp as the metal shards littering the factory floor. "Besides, who else can handle this better?" But Jason knew the truth. It wasn't about his skill. It was about his skin. The unspoken rules of the department dictated that the lone black worker should carry the greatest risks, a silent agreement no one dared challenge. One sweltering afternoon, as the machinery roared and sparks flew from welding torches, Rick approached Jason with yet another perilous assignment. The press machine, a towering behemoth of gears and hydraulics, was malfunctioning. It groaned ominously, its movements jerky and unpredictable. Every worker on the floor knew it was overdue for maintenance, and handling it during peak operation without a proper shutdown was nothing short of suicidal. Rick leaned against a support beam, arms crossed, and called out loudly enough for the entire floor to hear. "Carter, I need you to fix that press. Now!" Jason hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the machine. The warped steel frame, the shuddering movements. It was a death trap. "That machine's not safe, Rick," Jason replied, his voice steady but firm. "It needs to be shut down first, or someone's going to get hurt." Rick's smirk twisted into a sneer, his pale blue eyes glinting with condescension. "You're replaceable, Carter," he snapped, the words slicing through the air like a blade. "Do it, or find another job." The factory floor fell silent, the ambient noise of clanging metal fading into an oppressive quiet. Workers froze in place, their gazes darting nervously between Jason and Rick, but no one spoke. Fear was a currency Rick had in abundance, and he wielded it like a weapon. Jason felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. His fists clenched at his sides as he weighed his options. The sting of Rick's words wasn't new, but the stakes felt higher now. He thought of his wife, Monique, and their 2 young children waiting at home. A lost job meant lost security, a sacrifice his family couldn't afford. Slowly, he exhaled, pushing down the wave of anger and frustration that threatened to rise. "Fine," Jason said finally, his voice low but resolute. The words tasted bitter, but he forced them out. As he moved toward the press machine, he caught glimpses of his co-workers. Some looked away, shame flickering in their eyes. Others exchanged uneasy glances, their lips pressed into tight lines. No one dared intervene. The fear of Rick's retaliation was louder than their conscience, drowning out the small voice that told them this was wrong. Jason squared his shoulders and approached the machine, his heart pounding against his ribcage. The hiss of steam and the groan of straining metal filled his ears as he prepared to tackle yet another perilous task. In the back of his mind, a question lingered. How much longer could he endure this? The repair had been tense from the start. Jason's every move was precise, his hands steady despite the cacophony of the factory floor around him. The press machine groaned, its malfunctioning parts shifting unpredictably. Each creak and hiss sent a chill down his spine, but he pushed forward, determined to finish the task and avoid Rick's wrath. Then it happened. The machine jolted violently, a deafening metallic screech ripping through the air. Jason barely had time to react before a jagged shard of steel, propelled like a missile, tore into his leg. Pain exploded through his body, hot and searing, as he collapsed onto the cold, greasy floor. His vision blurred, the world around him dissolving into frantic shouts and the shrill wail of the factory's safety alarms. Blood seeped from his wound, pooling beneath him in a vivid, sickening red. Workers scrambled, their faces etched with horror, but Rick Dalton remained motionless, his expression unreadable. "Get him to the medics," Rick barked after a beat, his voice sharp with irritation rather than concern. Turning to another supervisor, he muttered loud enough for others to hear, "This is what happens when they don't follow instructions." Jason's co-workers exchanged uneasy glances, their shock mingling with a growing sense of helplessness. None dared challenge Rick, even as the reality of his callousness sank in. At the hospital, the prognosis was worse than Jason feared. A severe muscle tear that would sideline him for months. He lay in a stark, sterile room, the rhythmic beep of monitors his only company until Monique arrived. Her face, usually a source of calm, was now a storm of fury and anguish. She sat beside him, her hands trembling as she gently touched his. "They knew," she said, her voice low but sharp with anger. "Rick knew that machine wasn't safe." Jason clenched his jaw, his pride stinging even more than the injury. Monique's anger mirrored his own, but beneath it all was a gnawing worry about what would come next. Bills didn't stop for injuries, and his job had been their lifeline. A few days later, the factory delivered its response, a cheaply printed get-well card, signed with half-hearted platitudes from co-workers, and a formal termination letter. The reason? Failure to follow safety protocols. Jason stared at the letter, disbelief turning swiftly to fury. They had not only robbed him of his ability to work, but twisted the truth to place the blame squarely on his shoulders. He thought of his children, of the life he and Monique had worked so hard to build, now teetering on the edge of collapse. His hands tightened into fists, the paper crumpling beneath his grip. "They think they can get away with this," he said, his voice low and simmering with resolve. Monique met his gaze, her eyes blazing with determination. "They picked the wrong man to betray," she replied. And at that moment Jason knew they wouldn't let this injustice stand. Monique Carter wasn't just angry. She was determined. As a paralegal with years of experience navigating the legal system, she understood the importance of evidence and precision. While Jason recovered, she got to work. Every conversation, every piece of paperwork, and every memory from the factory floor became a potential weapon in their fight for justice. Her breakthrough came when a union worker, fearful of retaliation, slid an envelope under their front door one evening. Inside was a safety report on the defective press machine. The report was clear. The press had been flagged as hazardous and overdue for repairs. Rick had signed off on it weeks before the accident, but had ignored the recommendations, prioritizing production over safety. Monique's hands trembled as she read the report, not from fear, but from the realization that they now had proof of Rick's negligence. Word of Jason's accident began to spread among his co-workers. One man, his voice shaking with unease, confided in Jason. "Rick's been pulling this for years," he said. "He always picks us, the ones he thinks can't fight back. He knows no one will believe us." The man's words struck Jason deeply, solidifying the fact that his injury wasn't just bad luck. It was part of a pattern of discrimination and exploitation. Monique decided to take their fight public. She drafted a powerful social media post, carefully recounting the events leading up to the accident and the factory's cold response. She included photos of Jason's injured leg, the crumpled termination letter, and even a snippet of the ignored safety report. "This isn't just about my husband," she wrote. "This is about every black worker forced to risk their life for a paycheck while their safety is ignored." The post resonated like a thunderclap. Within hours, comments and shares poured in. Strangers offered support, others shared similar stories of workplace discrimination, and activists amplified the message. The hashtag #Justice for Jason began trending, and local news outlets reached out for interviews. The momentum caught the attention of a prominent civil rights lawyer who offered to represent Jason in a lawsuit against the factory. Together, they filed charges of negligence, racial discrimination, and wrongful termination. The case wasn't just about compensation. It was about exposing the systemic failures that had allowed Rick and the factory to operate with impunity. As the lawsuit gained traction, Jason and Monique felt the weight of their battle, but they also felt the growing support of a community that refused to stay silent. Their fight was no longer just for themselves, it was for everyone who had ever been told they were expendable. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Rick's smug confidence faltered as Jason's legal team presented damning evidence. Video footage revealed Rick's repeated refusals to shut down the machine. Witnesses testified about Rick's discriminatory practices, painting a clear picture of systemic bias. The jury deliberated for hours before delivering their verdict. Jason won the case, receiving substantial compensation for his injuries, emotional distress, and lost wages. Rick was fired, and the factory faced fines and public backlash. As Jason recovered at home, he received messages from other workers thanking him for standing up. The lawsuit had sparked broader investigations into unsafe practices and discrimination in factories across the region. Looking out at his kids playing in the yard, Jason felt a mix of relief and determination. This wasn't just his victory, it was a step toward justice for countless others trapped in the same cycle of fear and exploitation. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in years he felt hope.